Okay, I've just finished my PhD, my postdoc. I'm ready to move into it, but kind of overwhelmed about how to do it. I think that's the best advice I could give for an early career person. The formatting of someone's resume can really matter. Yeah.
Are you saying that maybe some of these might perform better than others in applicant tracking systems?
This is a really good example of something that I would avoid doing. Some really bad advice people get around optimizing their resumes for things like that.
The future of science and technology recruiting and some of the trends.
There's an emerging field of talent intelligence, what makes somebody want to work at a place, and what makes them stay at a place. Recruitment, retention strategy that a lot of places could really benefit from.
I should focus on this if I want to get a job in the science world. Hey, I'm Kylie. Welcome to the channel. I'm a web developer with over 10 years of experience. I've worked at startups, and most recently I spent the past 3 years at Amazon Web Services as a senior front-end web developer. So that's my world, big tech and web development. But today we're going to be talking to Hilary Dorton, which is actually my sister. She has a PhD in neuroscience, and she spent the past few years recruiting other PhDs to work at science-based startups and technology companies. So she knows a lot about recruiting, and it was interesting to dive into the differences between big tech and programming recruiting versus science and research recruiting. So if you're a programmer or a data scientist and you're interested in working in like a science-based company, this may be interesting to you. And if you are a PhD trying to get that first job in the industry, or if you are maybe getting a BS and you're interested in knowing what it's like to go through getting that job through the recruiting process, this might be interesting to you as well. So I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Hilary, and let me know what you think in the comments below. Hey Hilary, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to talk to you because this is a little bit of a different thing. Usually I bring on people who are programmers who are gonna write some code on screen, and that's really fun. But today this is very different because you have a background in science and technology recruiting. You also have a PhD in neuroscience, and you got a really interesting background. Also, you're kind of plugged into some of the trends in technology recruiting, science recruiting, the whole industry of talent acquisition. So I'm really excited to dig into a lot of that stuff.
Well, I appreciate being here and you asking me to come on to the channel. Like you said, my name is Hilary. I have a background in a variety of different types of science, from animal work all the way up to hardcore kind of data science work. But my PhD is in neuroscience, and I finished that up in 2019. And then I started my career in scientific recruiting. And I worked as a consultant with a variety of small to mid-size, even little tiny kind of stealth mode startup biotech, biopharma companies. And those spanned from very heavy, biologics and devices to more machine learning, AI kind of applications for the fields of genomics, bioinformatics, chemoinformatics. So I got a really, really good crash course of what it's like to kind of transition into industry for scientists. And I have done a lot of work hiring positions in those sort of computational science roles. That's what I've been doing for the last couple of years. And it's been very interesting, very fun, very fast paced. And I've learned a lot. I'm excited to share what I've learned.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you have a PhD. I'm sure that you had to decide between going into, a research type role or industry role where you were maybe working for some, big pharma company or something like that. It's like, how did you go from PhD to a recruiter of other scientists?
Scientific recruiting was something I was very unfamiliar with. I didn't even really understand that existed. I just kind of thought recruiting is recruiting. And of course, there are principles that are conserved across all fields of recruitment. But scientific recruiting, at least, the type that I do, really focused on having that scientific background and understanding of different modalities, different techniques, different phases of where people are in their scientific career, and trying to match them with roles that could play on those skills, help them grow, help them move into industry in a really meaningful way. I think, that dichotomy of academia versus industry is really widely talked about in academic circles. And I think only now are kind of the academic folks coming around to the idea that, okay, it's not selling out to move to industry. It's actually just a different way to do science.
When you would talk to some of the people who just graduated maybe, or they just got their PhD, they're looking for that first job, what were some of the things that they would ask you? What were some of the things you might tell them to help calm them down and say, like, you're going to get through this, you're going to get a great job?
Yeah, that's a really good question, especially in regards to folks that are coming out of an academic environment. There is a lot of trepidation because the preparation that folks get, I mean, it really varies. Like I said, there can be, someone can be in an environment where it's kind of off limits to talk about anything but what your next move is, the, academic ladder will be. And so people come with all kinds of levels of preparedness for what they want to do. And I always try to help people anchor in the skills that they have and the skills that they want to grow. I think keeping that constant and understanding, okay, I have these hard skills I can bring. I can do XYZ technique at the lab bench, but I'd really like to grow into this. And I don't really know what it's going to look like. I think there are a lot of people that are hiring for those roles that have been there. So really to come with that authenticity, be confident in what you can bring and be confident in what you want to learn. I think that's the best advice I could give for an early career person.
Tell me a little bit about some of the trends in recruiting and trends in science and technology recruiting. What are some of the tools that you would have used just as an individual recruiter?
I'd say most recruiters and agencies use some form of ATS, an applicant tracking system, that kind of houses resumes. It can be embedded into LinkedIn job posting, something like that. So when someone applies, their resume would move into these systems, and you can kind of keep track of their resume, information about the candidate, and then also move them through different stages of an interview process. And all the feedback can be housed in this one, safe place. And that can be really useful because that's, if you've ever gotten an email from a company 2 years after you applied and said, hey, are you still interested in working with us? We've just opened this role and you might be really good for it. That may be why they came across your resume in their existing system and decided to reach out. So those systems are really interesting. There's many of them. Some of them utilize more AI tools as those become available. Some of them are more bare bones. There's a whole industry for that type of software. And those are really interesting because this is where the formatting of someone's resume can really matter, because those systems can be really great, but they can also break really easily and not parse a resume correctly or something like that. So I don't know, if later in the conversation you want to chat about formatting of a resume or what that can and should look like to kind of make sure that it gets through all of those phases. But that's a tool. There's also, yeah, this is great. We can look at some of these now if you'd like to.
Yeah, okay, so this is just on Canva, resume templates. And I have a feeling that a lot of candidates are probably going on here or on Etsy or something to get a really beautiful, well-designed resume template. But are you saying that maybe some of these might perform better than others in applicant tracking systems?
Absolutely. So unfortunately, because beautiful resumes are beautiful, but I think that it's difficult for a lot of systems to handle things like pictures, things with multiple columns. It can really struggle with. So something like this, I mean, looks really great. If you were to hand me this or email me this, I would, it's beautiful. But the reality is that a lot of these tools can't handle this great of a resume. And especially in science or really any technical thing, I think the more information in the less space that you can take up is the best. So, you know, things like contact information. So take Jonathan's resume and note that he's a graphic designer. So this may look different in creative fields. But I think, you know, contact information, education, you know, people can debate about whether education should go at the end or the beginning, but whatever you're comfortable with. And information about maybe your skill set up top, sort of what you're looking for, and then your experiences in reverse chronological order. That always does pretty well. I would avoid a lot of special characters. So things like bullets are usually fine. But when you get into more wingdingy kind of looking things, it can really struggle with that.
Yeah.
And you know, obviously a PDF is ideal. Word docs and stuff don't do as well either in a lot of ATSs. But this is a really good example of something that I would avoid doing. So Samira has rated or ranked their experience level with their various skills. And so I would avoid doing that because that's very subjective. The idea is, hey, I'm being upfront about how well I can code in C++, but I couldn't do it if you asked me to do it on the day, you know, so I'm going to rate it 1 star. I see that a lot. And I think that can be really selling yourself short. I personally think that if it's not something you're willing to elaborate on in an interview, or if you wouldn't be ready to talk about how you've used it or how you can use it, I might just leave it off the resume. If anything, you could say I have some exposure to, you know, this language and this language, for instance. Yeah. But I'm proficient in these. But I would stay away from the ranking because it seems cool and very, you know, oh, here's some analytics about me, but it actually doesn't tell us very much. It might just be a representation of your confidence instead of, you know, something else. So yeah, so 78%, you know, I don't really know what that means.
Yeah.
Because Richard could be the best product designer ever, but he could just not have experience with this one tool that he thought he needed. So yeah, I would really hesitate as a recruiter to be like, so what is, you know, what are the remaining like 22% of your skill? Like, where is the gap?
I think
it's a really hard question to answer.
Yeah. So, I think this person this template is doing everything wrong that we talked about. So there's special graphics for the bullets. The languages here, she has 20% of Spanish and 90% of French. And also
if you're
just
fluent
95
in French,
of English.
Right. Like I would say I'm also 95 in English.
Yeah, I guess.
It is my first language, and yet.
And here it looked like teamwork is 1. Teamwork is very low here.
I don't know. I mean, I would definitely not do that for sure. I would definitely emphasize, you know, being a team player if you are one, even if you have some room to grow. But yeah, I think Karina is doing herself a disservice by ranking some of these skills, especially soft skills. That's even less quantifiable to me. And so I will either ignore that, or worse, you know, the ATS may not even be able to manage that, and it just looks like rubbish.
Mess.
If somebody looks really interesting, my practice is always to reach out and say, hey, your resume didn't come through. Like, can you please send it again or something? So it's not, you know, if that happens, sometimes it's just a software thing, but these are some things you can do to kind of reduce the likelihood that will mess up.
Let's see. Let's go to minimalist here and see if you see one that you think would do really well in an applicant tracking system. This one, but you said not 2 columns, right? So we should try to find one that's more like 1 column.
I would, you know, I think it can also depend on the industry that you're in. If you're really working towards that 1-page resume, maybe this is ideal, but I think that there's a lot of white space, which can seem really nice in terms of organization. And you definitely want to keep keep track of, how small the font is and that kind of thing. But the content is really what we're interested in. So, for something like this, this one looks a good deal better. I like this one, some main skills, a summary at the top. Again, it's debatable for a recruiter about whether they will read a summary statement. I personally like them. I feel like it gives me a good sense of what background you're coming with, what you bring, and what you're looking for. So if you are going to write one of those, I would try to constrain it to those and distill it down as much as you can, especially if you are changing fields or kind of making a bit of a jump. I think that can be really helpful if you're looking at something and being like, oh, well, this person has done this for the last 5 years, and why are they applying for this role? I would be intrigued, and that could give me that answer right there. So that can be a really effective little tool to indicate why you're applying, other than, a cover letter. But yeah, I think, these look okay. I think, again, I'd stay away from the 2 columns if possible, but the more text and the less characters, I think, the better it will do in a system.
Okay, that's good to know. I mean, and is it like you need to get through the first hurdle of the ATS before a recruiter will even see your resume, or does a recruiter usually at least see it and then it has to go through the ATS? Like, which way? What happens first?
It depends entirely on the style of recruiting and the group of recruiters that are looking at it. If it's a really small company, it doesn't really have an HR department or anything like that. I mean, and also depending on the way that you submit your resume, if it's like through Indeed or a site like that, versus like the company's website, the resumes could come through in different ways, and you can set them up to come to you in different ways. So some places will have the resumes just be emailed to a certain inbox or a certain area in their backend kind of website where they can look at all of them. Sometimes you can automate it more. To me, I feel like because hiring is really important, and especially as we move towards DEI work, I think it's really important to give an eye at least to a resume, every resume that I see. And I think that's personally important. There are some tools that are meant to advance DE&I by making things a little more blinded in terms of what the recruiter sees. So maybe de-identifying some of the information, things like that. But I don't know that the tools are there yet. So my preference is always to look at every resume. And if it's not a fit, it's not a fit. But it depends on the person and the volume of applications that are coming in. If it's a gigantic company, it could be really difficult for one recruiter to look at 700 resumes in a day. So I think it really depends. Some ATS will look for keywords, and you can program it to kind of show you only resumes that contain that. There are things like that. There's also, some really bad advice people get around optimizing their resumes for things like that, like putting things in the margins in, white, so that the keyword is on there, but, they may not actually have the relevant experience. Don't do that. That's not a great idea. But there are definitely things that I think the humanity in a recruiter can be appealed to by reading a resume.
And so, like, to summarize some of those points, if you're applying to a company where there'll be a lot of competition, you should probably keep your resume pretty bare bones, 1 column, mostly text, no picture, so that the resume can get through the applicant tracking system and be read. And you said, like, maybe include a small paragraph at the top. Other than that, they don't focus on the design of their resume or making it stand out visually. Just focus on having the right content on there so that it gets through the applicant tracking system, read by a recruiter, and then they'll contact you for all the juicy details about who you are.
Yes. Okay. And make sure that your email and everything is the email that you usually use, and that it's spelled correctly, that your information is correct. I tried to reach a candidate for a few hours before emailing and realizing that they had put their phone number in on their resume incorrectly.
Oh, wow.
So just double check that information. You also don't need to add your like street address, that kind of thing. You may just want to say, you know, I'm in the Atlanta area, I'm in the Los Angeles area, something like that. But make sure that the way that they can contact you is easily found.
Cool.
And as I said, no picture. I think that can be advice that is given sometime. Even in the templates that we just looked at, there were a few that had an image. I think it's unnecessary and can introduce bias where we don't need to.
Yeah.
We want to reduce that as much as possible. But I think the cleaner, the better.
Does your advice change at all if somebody is applying to that smaller startup that has 16 people where they may not have that volume of applicants? And so now there's a resume, there's maybe 10 resumes that they're looking at. Do you still want it to be pretty bare bones and follow all the same rules, or do the rules change at all?
For me, no. I think that overall, a clean resume that has that really highlights the candidate is the most important. You know, there are elements of someone's work style or something that can come through in just the way that they write their resume. But I think I would spend my time focusing on that and less about making it look great. A cover letter is maybe a better place to introduce a little bit of personality. If your cover letter gets messed up in an ATS, it's not the end of the world usually. Some places don't even look at the cover letter. So, you know, short and sweet for that as well. But you can also take the time to express your creativity or your passion for this type of work, something like that, where maybe it's not appropriate in like your skills section of your resume or something like that.
Awesome. I think that'll be very helpful for a lot of people. So let's transition into the last thing I was hoping we could talk about today, which is the future of science and technology recruiting and some of the trends more broadly. You know, every industry is being impacted and changed by artificial intelligence, as well as just new technologies, new ways people are connecting. There's a lot of data about pretty much everything and everyone. So how have those trends impacted your world? And, you know, what are some of the things that you're kind of working on and excited about in the near future of, you know, science and technology recruiting?
Yeah, I think that there is a really interesting opportunity. As I alluded to before, kind of a data nerd. And I think there's a lot of data nerds in TA. And
TA, talent acquisition.
Talent acquisition. And HR broadly, human resources, when you are thinking about how to hire, sort of what the strategy should be, what the growth should be. As a consultant for a lot of different companies, a lot of the work looks like building teams at the right scale, making sure that there is, you know, sustainable budget and the correct timelines for when things need to happen. In biopharma, especially, you know, there are very tight turnarounds and things like that once something goes between phases of a drug or being approved or something like that, or if there's an IPO coming or something like that. You know, you got to kind of think about what the structure of your teams and overall company should look like ideally, and hire accordingly. And so to do that, and just, you know, hiring in general, there's an emerging field of talent intelligence. And this is basically an area where we can introduce a lot of different variables about what draws somebody to a company, what keeps somebody at a company, and what keeps things running smoothly, to possibly draw more people or, you know, improve the culture, the DE&I initiatives, all of that type of thing is kind of bundled into this talent intelligence field, where we can sort of take the data that we receive about comp expectations, for instance, or location. So, you know, what would transitioning to remote look like? How do people feel about working in person? You know, all of this can inform where we open up our next office or where we move, or, you know, whatever the case. Also, what kind of representation is there currently, and where would we like it to be in terms of diversity, inclusion? What initiatives should there be? Are we taking on? All of this really feeds into what makes somebody want to work at a place. and what makes them stay at a place. And that's really the heart of talent intelligence, is using all that information that we gather from candidates to improve their experience and to make sure that everything runs smoothly to the point where they enjoy being part of the culture. They want to contribute to that, and they feel safe there, and they feel like they can grow in that environment. And so talent intelligence isn't just trying to match somebody's comp expectations so they don't go to another company. It really encompasses this whole recruitment retention strategy that a lot of places could really benefit from. And, companies can fail for all kinds of reasons and suffer for all kinds of reasons, including culture, including whether or not people feel valued at their company, and whether they, feel like there's adequate amounts of growth that they can do in a reasonable period of time for their own goals. And so if someone tells you their goals as you're recruiting them, and you know that you won't be able to meet those goals, and you have no intention of changing things around so you can meet those goals, it's pretty likely that person is going to move on. Once it comes time for them to bump up against a growth edge and they realize they can't make it, to the next rung in the time that they wanted. So there's all kinds of little and big indicators that someone is happy, someone is wanting to stay, someone's wanting to leave, their tenure at a company. I think we know now that it's getting shorter and shorter in terms of how long people stay at any given place, and understanding the behavioral or cultural reasons why I think is really important for helping people kind of navigate what their professional life will look like, and what people's time at a given place will look like, what you can expect for someone in a given type of role to, when do you think they're going to move on? When should we kind of think about reevaluating our ladder in terms of titles and comp and all that? So there's so much there. There's so much data that we're collecting, like you said, about everyone and everything. But I think this is a place where it can really be used to enhance someone's experience and, make it enjoyable enough that they either stay where they are or enjoy their candidacy process elsewhere.
So talent intelligence is like something that a company would implement with. Is it sort of like a system they would buy off the shelf that says now you have talent intelligence, or is it like a set of behaviors and processes and things that you would have to kind of like build one off, like, oh, let's get data from here, and put it all into a dashboard, and now we're doing talent intelligence? Like, is it somewhere in between?
I'd say that it's, at least now, my experience with it, it's more of the latter. There are, of course, a few companies that are kind of trying to make it into a product. But I think there are definitely agencies and firms and stuff that are directly focused on this. There's, you can check out the Talent Intelligence Collective. That's a really interesting group site started by someone from Amazon, I believe, that, that's what they focus on. That's kind of their consulting work. And so that's a cool, place to learn. But I think it's really neat because it combines these analytics, especially some of the more qualitative things. And I love a qualitative data problem because, it's a little bit harder and kind of harder to integrate than just, straight up numbers, but it's also really important data that tells us a lot about what people want, what people like, what people are kind of over in terms of the trends of workplace, dynamics. And so, yeah, you pulled up the podcast. This is a really good one. So that could be a good place to learn a bit more about that type of work.
Cool. Yeah, that's interesting. And I like the Friends reference here, the one with,
they're
all Friends episodes. I guess everybody's friends in the talent world. That's awesome. So talent intelligence, is that something that you feel like is going to completely revolutionize the industry? Or do you feel like it's an interesting trend that businesses are starting to pay attention to these numbers, but it's not going to fundamentally change the way that talent acquisition works and hiring works?
That's a good question. I think there's a lot of work to do. I alluded to earlier, especially around what DE&I actually looks like in these spaces. And I think especially in STEM and the sciences, I think that it's really been an interesting thing to kind of watch develop, because I think there's meeting a quota where you kind of verge on maybe tokenism in certain ways. There's also helping someone feel safe and supported. And I'm very passionate about the factors that get somebody to the point where they're applying to their first science job, because there's so many factors that come before that can deter somebody from pursuing really important work in this field. And so I think that collective sort of holistic view of candidates and job matches and company cultures is crucial. I don't know how it will, ultimately change things. I hope for the better, but I also do think that there's still a lot of work to be done. And I think part of this is addressing some of that work to make sure that hiring practices are as strong as they should be and as reflective of the current, market trends and current workforce that, the generations that come in, what they are focused on in terms of how they like to do things, how they like to get stuff done, where they like to work, how they like to work, how, we can implement a bit more humanity, like I said, into the whole process. And so that, I think, is a place where talent intelligence is really going to hopefully help, to address some of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds very interesting. If you could leave somebody listening who's thinking about maybe changing careers into a more science-based company, or somebody who's just graduating, maybe they're getting their PhD or master's or a BS, what would you say to that person if they're thinking about getting into your field that they can take away and say, I should focus on this if I want to get a job in the science world?
There are a number of pieces of advice I would give, like I said before, depending on somebody's phase that they're in. But I think the things that stand out to me are the ways that people can describe their science or their comprehension of a certain problem that they're working on. And I think in a recent video, you were going through somebody, working through a code review or a test for an interview, kind of how he would prepare for that. And I think getting to understand somebody's process is really important in tech, in science. It should be important for, any field. But I think being able to talk about that work with confidence, but also, demonstrating your expertise and not shying away from things that you don't know yet, or that you don't have to act like you've heard every single word that someone is using in terms of jargon and that kind of thing. There's a lot of learning that you do in your first job and your second, and all your jobs, especially if it's your first one out of college. Definitely, if you have internships or opportunities to even do small projects, it doesn't have to be a whole summer. That can be cost prohibitive for a lot of people. So any experience, I think, is really useful. But I would say be able to describe what your role was in any given project, even if it was your coursework and you worked on this final, or was your senior thesis, or whatever the case. Be able to describe that well and describe how that experience can bring you into your next experience. Be prepared to talk about what you learned from that, what skills you realized you needed and took on, what part you played, and take ownership of it. I think that's always really impressive to me when someone can talk about work that they've done, and be proud of it, be excited about what happened with it, talk about places where it didn't go so well and what you did to change it. I think that mindset, especially for early career folks, I think that's really impressive when someone can reflect on what went well, what didn't go well, how well they worked as X function of X team, how they communicated issues to a supervisor, tell me about a time when, is always really useful, because it gives someone insight into, okay, it looks like they can use R and Python and they've built some pipelines, but I don't really know what that means. Was it specific to the thing that they're doing, and they would be bound to that, and they'd just be working off that same script, trying to figure out other things, and that might also be fine. Or can they apply their skills to all kinds of different problems, and are they interested in doing that? So I think that, demonstrating your skill set by sort of what you've done and what you'd like to do, and where you've stumbled, I think is the most insightful thing, because your skills are your skills, but those can always grow. But I think, the way that you approach them is things that hiring managers, recruiters are really interested in, and especially in biotech, in these really innovative spaces, I think that's who they want to see.
Science, a lot like programming, is all about a lot of people making small contributions to ultimately lead to some breakthrough. And I know that you got your PhD. You could have gone in a lot of directions after that. And what you chose to do was to help place scientists in specific roles that they could go then contribute their part and, be a part of making some new knowledge or creating some new medicine or some new technology. And through all the people that you've helped place, I think you've probably leveraged yourself in a way that you could never have possibly done if you were the one doing that science. I mean, for every single scientist that you place, they are out there doing science that they wouldn't have been able to do in that specific role without your help. So I just think it's really cool that you chose to do this. You probably had a pretty big impact if you think about all the ripple effects of all the people that you've placed. And
I hope so.
yeah, I'm sure they feel that way too. So thank you so much for joining me. Anything else you want to share? Where can people find you on the internet? Should they just connect with you on LinkedIn if they want to ask you questions?
Yeah, of course. I'm always open to an email here or there. You can find me. Hilary Dorton is my LinkedIn. You can connect with me there. But yeah, I think it's a really exciting time to be thinking about your first job, your fifth job, whatever it is, and stay confident.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, Hilary.
Yeah, thanks, Kylie.
Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. Please let me know what you think in the comments, and let me know what you'd like to see more or less of. I want to make these videos really valuable for you. So thanks for watching.